Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. And today we're actually going to be talking about what the heck do you do after you got a deal in escrow. Like you've gone out and you've negotiated a deal and it's popped in escrow and you're like, now what the heck do I do? And so when you're representing a buyer, I'm going to show you exactly the steps that I use. And not that it's the right way. I mean, there's different ways to do things, but from the past 15 or so years I've been in real estate, this is almost 20 years. Gosh, I'm not that old. How I've learned to do things over the years and just the best practices and what's kept me out of trouble for the most part, and what to do and definitely what not to do. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to open up escrow. And so what we're going to do is compile an email, and you're going to want to CC a couple of different people on this thing. Let's head to the computer for 2 seconds. I'm going to show you exactly how I do it, and let's get into it. So the first thing to do is actually send an email out to your escrow agent. I'm going to use Mercy Perry as a example here. And so you're going to say something in subject like opening escrow and say something like, hi Mercy, here's another escrow for you. And then what I'm going to do here is actually list everybody's information. And so if you're representing the buyer, don't rely on the bottom part of the contract with the contact information. It's nice to put that contact information in there. I don't do it just because I don't really want the seller's agent to contact my buyer without me. And so it's just, it puts me in between, the client and potentially the other selling agent, the seller's agent. And so, we'll just take that for what it is. So what I'm going to do is say I'm, representing the buyer in this transaction, and then put their contact information. And so then when I'm done putting the buyer information in there, I'm actually going to list who the lender is. And a lot of people skip this step, and then the title agency, they're going to go back through your contract, and hopefully you've got a pre-qual in there. They're going to look at the pre-qual and find the lender's contact info in there, but take 2 seconds. It really, really helps the escrow agents out when you put all of the contact in there for the lender as well. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so now that we've got that done, I'm actually going to go back in and put the seller's agent contact information in there. And one important thing too, if you're using a transaction coordinator, or if the other party's using a transaction coordinator, please put that contact information in there, and also use a CC. And so you're gonna want to CC the lender, because usually the lender doesn't have the purchase contract, and they wind up reaching out to you as the buyer's agent or to the title company to get that contract. Just CC everybody on one email. It will open up the line of communication. And then you've got a really nice thread, and depending on what email system you use, you've probably got a really nice thread of the whole conversation, right? And so this will cover your butt and save everybody a whole heck of a lot of time. All right, hey guys, I'm just gonna hard cut into this thing as I'm editing, and I just wanna clarify one thing real quick. When you're creating this email, you really just wanna send it out to your lender and to the escrow agent. I would hold off on sending this to the seller's agent, and maybe just send them a quick email along with the transaction coordinator on the other side, just saying, hey, I opened up escrow. If you guys need anything, reach out to Mercy Perry or whoever your escrow agent is. That's all I got to say for 2 seconds here, and let's get right back into your regularly scheduled programming. See ya. Okay, so then I put like a very quick note in there, just please, and I'm telling Mercy this, please CC everybody on the communication. And so the next thing I really want to do here is just wrap up the email and leave any important information. So for example, like if it's a fast close and maybe it's a cash deal, or maybe it's an investor deal, or something that's kind of out of the ordinary of like a 30-day close, or maybe it's like a hard money lender that you're using, and maybe they've got like certain disclosures they need, or whatever the situation is, please tell the escrow officer that up front. It will save them a ton of time trying to track things down. And if they need to expedite the title report, they can do that. But the only way to do that is by communicating that to your title or escrow officer. And so I'm going to do that right now, and then we're going to wrap up this email and send it off with the attachment of the purchase contract. And so then the next thing to do is order the inspections. And so let's talk about that for 2 seconds. This is the most important part of the transaction, if you want my honest opinion. I have gotten myself into some trouble by not doing all the inspections that I should have or could have. And so, for example, in Old Town Scottsdale, in a lot of parts of Phoenix, you've got to be very, very careful. You should be ordering a sewer line inspection. don't rely on the spuds. And so the spuds are a good guideline, right? And you should be getting the spuds from the seller's agent within the first 5 days of the contract. Review them, like go through them. You're going to learn a lot about the property and find out if you need to ask further questions about something. So if there's been a roof issue in the past, or if there's been an electrical issue, or if there's been an addition, are there permits? And you should be doing permit searches in the city of Phoenix, city of Scottsdale, city of Tempe. You can literally go online and see what permits have been pulled and if those permits have been satisfied. And you can see the inspection history too. If they've passed, if they've failed, who did the work, how much the work was valued at. You can see all those things, or most of those things, by just going into Google and typing in Phoenix, City of Phoenix building permit search. And it will take you to a site where you can literally look by the address and find that out. That is a good buyer's agent. That's going above and beyond for your client to make sure they're in a very, very good spot. So if anything out of the ordinary comes up, then you've done your due diligence. And so getting back to the sewer lines, a lot of these sewer lines are cast iron. And what happens is they actually corrode from the inside out, which is really interesting. You think it would be the other way around because it's exposed to the earth, but actually the earth kind of protects that, and they end up corroding from the inside out, or they even get roots. Trees, bushes, all sorts of invasive species come in and actually can drill through that a thick cast iron pipe, and then have roots that will actually, I've seen them come out of a toilet. And so they've actually come up and snaked up through a toilet, and then you've literally got to use Roto-Rooter, or you've got to replace the entire sewer line. And that's a very, very expensive process. A lot of the homes that we have here don't have basements, and so you're literally jackhammering up part of the concrete foundation in order to replace those lines. It can be a very, very, very costly mistake. And so avoid that mistake and order a sewer inspection. If they're newer homes, find out if it's cast iron or if it's ABS. If it's cast iron, you should probably be ordering an inspection. If it's ABS, you might want to be safe anyway and see if there's been any kind of issues with the ABS pipes, because the same kind of issues can happen. You can have fracturing or fissuring, or you can have low spots, they're called bellies, where water will sit and basically when you flush a toilet, it hammers it and it causes issues. And so there's so many things that you need to be aware of. Roofing inspections, HVAC inspections, separate pool inspections. You should be going through a long list, termite inspections, insect infestation inspections, in finding out everything you can about the property, and then going through and looking at the title report when Mercy sends it over, whoever your title agent sends that over. Things you want to find out right up front. I figured this out the very, very hard way. Is there enough equity in the property to pay off all the liens? And so what has happened to me in the past is that we get a deal in escrow and we've come up to the last day of closing. This is not a joke, and this ended up in a lawsuit. The seller didn't have enough cash. They weren't aware that they needed to bring cash in to close this deal. Of course, the first thing you do is take a commissionectomy, right? And so your commissions evaporate immediately. The second thing that's going to happen is that potentially your buyers cannot purchase that property and you have to negotiate a short sale, or you get a bail. And so this particular property, we didn't find out until the last day. It was not Mercy Perry, it was a different company that hadn't done their due diligence, a title company, hadn't done due diligence enough to figure out that there is not enough equity in the property to pay everything off, including the agents. And so the seller had to bring in $7,000. And shockingly, the seller's agent loaned the seller the money to come in and get it closed. But it cost my buyer several days, and it was my fault too. 100% my fault. I should have looked at the title report, I should have added up the numbers, and I should have seen if there was enough equity in there to pay off all the liens. There was some weird stuff going on in the title, I want to get into it, but there were some liens in the property that we didn't know were there, they weren't disclosed. I should have done my due diligence, and I didn't. I made a mistake, 100%, and yes, it actually ended up in a lawsuit, and we'll leave it at that. And so it worked out in our favor at the end, but you got to cover your butt in these things. Real estate is one of those transactions, it's a big transaction, right? You don't want to screw these things up. And so every point that you can do an inspection, every time that you get a document in, you should be inspecting those documents. If your property that you're buying is in an HOA controlled environment, or they're a community facilities district, whatever it is, you need to make a call, a physical call, to the HOA office and find out exactly what the transfer fees are, if there's capital improvement fees, if there's anything funny going on there, if there's prepaid HOA dues due, and make sure that everybody's got enough to close. don't rely on the HOA addendum, because a lot of times, literally, listing agents will go in the MLS and they will just look at somebody else's listing and hope that it's correct and put that stuff in listing and throw that on the HOA addendum. Your job as a buyer's agent is to go out and do the due diligence on all of these things. If you need septic inspections, please note the seller is responsible for paying for those, and that's a negotiation. If you're doing a well inspection, we've had situations where on the last day of closing, we found out that there's bacteria in a well and it has to get treated because the lenders won't lend on a property that you can't drink the water out of, right? I've literally learned all these things the wrong way because I didn't do what I should have done. And so please do all the inspections. Be relentless about inspections and be very upfront with your buyers that when you get under contract, the expenses are going to start to roll in. They've got to come out of pocket for an appraisal, most likely. They've got to come out of pocket for all these inspections up front. Do not pay for them, too, by the way. I've done this many times where I've offered to pay for the inspections, the deal blows up, and then the buyers walk, and I never recoup my money because they never closed. And so prepare them. And a lot of times, be careful about putting these things on credit cards. What happens is that they've got a pre-qual that is based on a credit score at that moment before you went into escrow. And then if they start charging a $500 appraisal and then a $300 inspection and then a $250 sewer inspection, and then they've got a well inspection and they've got a $60 termite inspection, guess what? $1,000 of fees. What happens is that credit card only had, I have one here, a $1,000 limit on it, right? And so now that credit card is maxed out. And what happens is when that deal goes through underwriting, they pull the borrower's credit again. And guess what? Their credit score dropped by 60 points because they maxed out their only credit card. And now the loan is denied. And then you've screwed it up. So you've got to be able to communicate effectively to your buyers exactly how much things are going to cost. It can be a difficult conversation. If your buyers are in down payment assistance and they've barely got enough scratch to come together for all the inspections and stuff and the down payment that's required, and then they've got to come up with homeowners insurance, and keep in mind that a lot of these guys, they don't have enough money for the 2 or 3 months worth of escrow that you have to buffer for the homeowners insurance and for the property taxes. They have to fund that initial escrow account too, so keep that in mind. These things are all negotiable though, right? So like if you've got a buyer that's literally down to their last penny, maybe if you find a generous seller, depends on the market, you can find a seller that's willing to pay for some of these inspections up front. And so negotiate everything. So now we've done all the inspections, right? You've opened up escrow. You've sent the contract out. Everybody's got the contract. You've got the title report back. You've looked at the title report. You're going to look at the spuds. Now it's time to prepare the BINSR. The BINSR has to be done within 10 calendar days. Guys, calendar days include holidays and weekends. And so what has happened a lot of times is that they'll get a deal in escrow and then they wait 10 days to start doing inspections. Well, the 10 days are up. And like once that 10-day inspection period passes, you're buying the house as is and you've lost your inspection contingency. And then the only other contingencies you have would be something like if they reissued the spuds and you got lucky, if something came up funny, that they literally just didn't disclose, if the appraisal comes up short, or you still have your finance contingency, right? So you're taking a huge risk. And I have had agents in my office under my care fail to submit BINSRs, and they take the house as is. I had a deal, and I don't know if you guys have been following me on social media, where I had a buyer that refused to sign a BINSR, and I had to send that BINSR regardless. And so we're not going to get into that, but you guys have to have communication with your buyers and say, look, you've got to submit this, or this is the consequence, and get it in writing. Put everything in writing, whether that be text message, it could be on your phone, it could be an email, it could be over Snapchat. I don't care, take screenshots of that stuff, whatever you got to do, but just please get it in writing every single time. And so once you get all the inspections done and you submit the BINSR, then a second round of negotiations happens, right? And so you've asked for a ton of things in the BINSR, maybe it's 5 or 10 things, some things that are very, very important to your buyer, and then the seller's going to look at that, and seller's agents are going to look at that, and probably mentally figure out what they can do, what they can't do, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, and then they're going to come back to you. And so the trick of this thing is that when you're talking about negotiating a BINSR, and I think I did a whole course on negotiating a BINSR, it's not really a situation where you can counter back and forth. Like the initial offer, you can do a counter offer, and you can counter offer the counter offer and counter offer that counter offer. and come to a meeting of the minds. The BINSR is not really like that. It's not designed to be that way. It's always good to have either a phone call or an email conversation or at least a text conversation saying, hey, I'm drafting up the BINSR. I want to communicate the stuff that we need up front. Can you please give me a little bit of guidance on what your seller is willing to do or what not willing to do so that we can keep this deal together, right? So that we can all come to the meeting of the minds and continue with escrow. So you're going to send that BINSR over to the seller's agent. You're going to come back, they're going to come back to you and say, hey, we're willing to do this, this, and this, and this, but not this. Then you only have a couple different options. You can cancel the contract. You can accept it as is, or that's about it. So it's limited options, and that's what I'm talking about. Have a conversation with the seller's agent up front and be very, very frank and honest with them. Those are difficult conversations to have. I've had deals where we had to negotiate like $20,000 worth of repairs. It's tough, right? So once you get that BINSR negotiated, really the next couple things that you're going to do are pretty easy. At some point, you're going to get a final settlement statement or at least an estimated settlement statement. Please go through that thing and make sure that all of the fees are correct. I've caught mistakes. We're all humans, and please don't ever blame somebody or accuse somebody of doing something they shouldn't have done. 99.999% of the time, people that make an error make a complete honest mistake. And so the escrow officers, God, these guys they work relentlessly, and they're so underthanked, genuinely. Like, they work their butts off. If they made a mistake, just bring it to their attention. They'll fix the settlement statement and move on. A lot of times, I see the commissions wrong. I think they just assume 3 and 3. That's not always correct, obviously. So make sure the commissions are correct. Make sure the HOA transfer fees are being appropriately assigned to the right party. Make sure that the capital improvement fees match the HOA addendum. Make sure that everything kind of lines up. Make sure that the escrow date is correct. I've had incorrect closing dates on contracts where they didn't catch it in a counteroffer. I've seen some really, really weird things go on. So look at the estimated settlement statement and absolutely make sure that everything's in line, and that will make the final walkthrough the last piece of what you're going to do besides go to closing. So once you look at the final settlement statement, everything lines up, we're prepared to close. You look at the cash that's due to the seller. Make sure it's a positive number and that they're not bringing cash in. Make sure that the cash from the buyer, if the buyers are prepared to bring that amount in, it has to be a certified check or a wire. They cannot accept personal checks, and they cannot absolutely accept cash. We've had buyers bring in $10,000 worth of cash, and the escrow officer will look at you like you're crazy, and then they'll send you to a bank, and you will go get a certified check and bring that check back, or send a wire. And so with wires, be very, very careful. The wire cutoff in Arizona is usually about 2 o'clock. And so if you're closing in the afternoon, you're not going to close and fund in the same day, very likely, right? So you've got to be very, very aware of timing on these things too. Schedule your closings and be at the closing. Be at the closing. If something goes wrong, you are the first line of defense to keep that deal together. And honestly, it's a huge shout out to the agents that do this. I'm one of the few agents, and I don't know why, but I attend 100% of my closings unless I'm not literally on my deathbed. I will always make it to the closing, or at least I will phone in and let the buyers know that I've reviewed all the documents, everything's good to go, the interest rates are correct, the fees are correct, everything's good to go, and you're going to be very reassuring when you do that. But then, really at this point, your job is almost done. Do the final walkthrough. Go through the BINSR items. Bring the inspectors back. If you've got a complicated BINSR, your inspector should come back and re-inspect. And that should be included in that upfront fee. And so if you guys need inspectors, reach out to me on social media. I'll throw you a couple names. I'm not going to plug them here. And go through that BINSR with a fine-tooth comb and make sure every single thing is done. If something doesn't look right, what you need to do is use that final walkthrough. That turns into a cure notice. So what you're going to do is say, hey, look, the seller didn't complete this repair, or they didn't complete it adequately, okay? And that's a very, very subjective thing, right? And so something that's adequate to you might not be adequate to your sellers or your buyers. And so ask questions. Does this look okay to you? And do not put words in their mouth, okay? Please. That'll get you in trouble. Other things. So once you get the final walkthrough done and you're pretty much good to go, you show up to closing. You're going to sit there for an hour while they sign documents, and it's very uncomfortable, and you're probably going to want to tend to be on this. Put this away, and please Pay attention to your buyers and make sure that everything's good. Make light of the situation. Bring them a closing gift if you're going to do so. And then be sure to be prepared to hand off those keys at some point late in the afternoon. Usually they record between, call it 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Be sure to coordinate the utilities, because a lot of times what happens is the seller shuts off the utilities the day of closing, and then the buyer should be picking that up. And be aware that they could be moving in the dark. And I've had that happen before, and yes, it's my fault because I'm the professional. I should have told them, hey, you got to go out and get the SRP or APS turned on. Make sure the water, that they set up the Cox internet, they set up all the other stuff that, that would make it very comfortable to move in that day. And then be with them when you hand off those keys. And so, we'll talk about that in a different training, but that's essentially it. It's not a difficult process. If you guys have questions, please reach out to me. If you have questions during the transaction process, reach out to your broker if that's appropriate. Lending stuff. Let me just touch on lending for 2 seconds. There are a lot of bad lenders and there's a lot of good lenders out there. The good ones will be very proactive. They'll send LSUs weekly. The ones that are bad, that scare me, are the ones that go MIA and go kind of dormant on you. And so you should be constantly following up with the lender and saying, hey lender, where are we at? Have you ordered the appraisal? Have you got the title report? Does everything look good? Where are we at in the process? Have you sent the thing to underwriting? Has this been processed? What documents can I help you get? And be a team player and offer your assistance. That will make the transaction go fantastically smooth, and then you're going to be set up to go to closing. And so make that money, have a prosperous day. I can't wait to see you on the next training. If you guys want to see more trainings, leave it in the comments and I'll create these videos as fast as I can. I love you, have an amazing day, and I will see you very, very soon. Take care.